They dismissed her as too cautious, said a woman like her didn't have the instincts or aggression to fly combat missions. But when a fighter jet malfunctioned mid-air during a crowded air show, with hydraulics failing and a pilot freezing, in panic, she was the only one who stepped forward. Before we reveal the full story, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments below where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Ridgecrest Military Aviation Academy didn't have a flashy entrance, just a weathered stone archway and a single guard booth that had seen better decades. That was the whole point. If you needed to be impressed by the curb appeal, you weren't cut out for supersonic flight. The compound sprawled across 800 acres of sun-baked concrete and precision-cut grass, every inch designed to weed out hesitation. The air tasted like jet fuel and ambition, that particular mix of ozone, hydraulic fluid, and barely contained adrenaline that clings to any high-performance flight school. Dormitories stood in perfect formation, flags snapping in the crosswind, and the distant thunder of engines punctuated every conversation. Everywhere you looked stood cadets in pressed uniforms, posture perfect, voices carrying that distinctive confidence that came from good breeding, prep schools, and family names that appeared in aviation textbooks. Their duffel bags, brand new with academy patches barely attached, lined the check-in area like soldiers at attention. Elise Hartwell didn't look like she belonged there at all. Hell, she didn't even try to. There she stood at the back of the registration line in faded khakis that had softened from too many wash cycles, not from some designer's distressed collection. Her chambray button-up wasn't regulation issue, just cotton that had seen enough sunlight to fade unevenly at the shoulders. And those boots, they'd clearly been resoled twice, the leather worn into perfect comfort rather than parade ground shine. Her duffel, not some high-end tactical bag with specialized compartments, hung from her shoulder like an old friend. Canvas, with a patch on the side, bearing the name of her father's garage in Lanesborough. The zipper struggled at one corner, testament to years of overuse. Meanwhile, the aviation world circled around her like it was made of different air. Young, men with perfect haircuts discussing their father's squadron numbers, instructors with clipboard authority and aviator sunglasses that never seemed to come off. The whole place hummed with that particular frequency of people who measured success in G-forces and landing speeds. Elise just shifted her weight slightly and waited her turn in line. The registration officer did a double take when she stepped forward. He was young, probably 25, with a crew cut so precise it might have been measured with calipers. Elise Hartwell. "This is the combat aviation track," he said, voice caught between confusion and caution. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm aware." The officer's eyes darted to his computer screen, then back to her. "You understand this is a 16-week high-intensity program, not support staff training." "I qualified in the top percentile on the entrance exams," she said without inflection. Behind her, someone snickered. A low voice muttered, "Probably got the scoring grid backward." Another responded with a half-laugh that wasn't quite disguised as a cough. Elise didn't turn around. She just waited, steady as oak. The officer handed over her room assignment and security badge. "Orientation at 0600, Barracks 3, Northern Quad." "Thank you," she said simply, taking the items without further comment. As she walked away, the cadet behind her called out, "Hey, they serving tea and cookies at orientation, or is that just for the ladies' section?" Laughter rippled through the line. Elise kept walking, her stride even, back straight but not stiff. The sound of mockery faded behind her, replaced by the distant roar of an F-22 cutting through the morning sky. Her eyes tracked its path instinctively, measuring its arc, calculating the crosswind compensation in her head before she even realized she was doing it. Some habits couldn't be trained away, not even by ridicule. The first 4 weeks passed in a blur of classroom theory, simulator hours, and physical training that turned muscles to rubber and brains to fog. Cadets dropped out one by one. Some failed the written exams, others couldn't handle the G-force simulations. A few simply disappeared overnight, bunks empty by morning inspection. Elise stayed. She wasn't the best at everything. Her physical test scores were middle of the pack. Her classroom performance was strong, but not exceptional. But in the simulators, particularly emergency response and systems troubleshooting, she was untouchable. "It's because she thinks like a mechanic," one cadet told the others during a rare free hour. "She hears what the plane's trying to tell her." When they finally moved to actual aircraft, the class had dwindled from 24 to 15. Captain Frey, lead flight instructor, Air Force legend with 3 combat tours and a face that had forgotten how to smile, stood before the gleaming T-38 Talons. "Today you fly," he announced. "Not in simulation, not in theory. In the real world, where mistakes have consequences." He paired them off, instructor and cadet for each aircraft. When he reached Elise, he hesitated, then said, "Hartwell, you're with me." Whispers rippled through the group. The captain never flew with first-timers. Never. As they walked toward the jet, he spoke without looking at her. "Your simulator scores are impossible, sir. Nobody gets perfect marks on emergency protocols. Nobody. I just follow the procedures, sir." "That's not what I mean," he said, stopping short of the ladder. "You anticipate failures before they appear on the diagnostic panel. That's not procedure. That's instinct." Elise met his gaze. "My father called it listening to the machine. Said every engine tells you when it's hurting, if you care enough to hear it." Something shifted in Captain Frey's expression. Not softening. Exactly, but a kind of recognition. "Your father, he flew?" "No, sir." "Fixed." "But he understood airframes better than anyone I've ever known." Captain Frey nodded once, then gestured to the ladder. "Let's see if you can fly as well as you listen." The flight was textbook. Takeoff, basic maneuvers, landing. Elise's hands were steady on the controls, her voice clear on the radio. When they taxied back to the hangar, Captain Frey was silent for a long moment. Then he said simply, "Good work, Hartwell." It wasn't effusive praise, but from Captain Frey, it might as well have been a standing ovation. 3 months into the program, the real evaluations began. Not just flight skills, but combat simulation, tactical decision-making, and the intangible qualities that separated good pilots from great ones. Captain Frey called it pressure testing. The rest of the class called it Hell Week. Elise's turn came on a Wednesday afternoon, the sky bruised with gathering storm clouds. She climbed into the Talon behind Captain Frey, mind already mapping contingencies, body relaxed but ready. "Today's scenario," Captain Frey called over the engine whine, "is escort duty gone wrong. You're protecting a medical evac when hostiles appear. Your fuel is limited. Weather is deteriorating. Command wants you to engage and neutralize the threat, but the evac pilot is calling for immediate cover." The scenario was deliberately constructed with contradictory objectives. Classic military dilemma. Engage the enemy or protect the vulnerable. There was no right answer, only justifiable choices. They took off into darkening skies, the storm front rolling in faster than predicted. Lightning forked in the distance. Rain began to streak the canopy. Captain Frey's voice crackled over the comms. "Scenario begins now. Hostiles at your 2 o'clock. Evac calling for coverage at your 6. What's your move, Hartwell?" Elise scanned the horizon, calculated fuel reserves, measured the storm's approach. She made her decision. "Escort," she said without hesitation. "The mission is protection, not elimination." She felt rather than saw. Captain Frey's frown. "Hostiles are closing in. Evac is clear if you engage now." "Negative," Elise replied. "Hostiles are using the storm for cover. Visibility is dropping. Engaging risks losing both targets in deteriorating conditions. The aircraft bucked suddenly as they hit a pocket of turbulence. Rain hammered the canopy like bullets. Lightning split the sky directly ahead, too close for comfort. "Weather's worse than forecasted," Captain Frey muttered, momentarily breaking character. "We need to head back. After I complete the mission," Elise said firmly. Captain Frey looked over his shoulder. "The scenario is aborted, Cadet. Weather protocol dictates immediate return to base." "With respect, sir," Elise said, eyes fixed on the storm, calculations running in her head. "We still have 15 minutes of safe flight time before this front fully arrives. The mission can be completed within parameters." "That's not your call to make. In a real combat situation it would be," she countered. "And you said to treat every drill like it's real." Their eyes locked for a split second, his angry, hers determined. Then Captain Frey exhaled sharply. 3 minutes, then we abort. No discussion. Clear?" "Clear, sir." Elise banked the aircraft sharply, dropping altitude to gain speed, using the storm's own momentum to propel them forward. She completed the escort pattern with textbook precision, maintaining perfect distance despite visibility dropping to near zero. When the 3 minutes elapsed, she turned the Talon toward base without being told. They landed just as hail began to fall, pelting the runway like angry fists. Captain Frey climbed out first, then turned to help Elise down the ladder. His expression was unreadable, jaw tight, eyes hooded. "My office, now," was all he said. Inside his office, Spartan with only a desk, 3 chairs, and walls lined with squadron photos, Captain Frey closed the door with deliberate care. "Do you know why I became an instructor, Hartwell?" he asked. "Finally, no, sir. Because I got tired of attending memorial services." He turned to face her. "Flying isn't just about skill. It's about judgment, knowing when to push and when to fall back." Elise stood at attention, eyes forward. "Yes, sir. What you did today wasn't boldness, it was stubbornness, and stubbornness gets pilots killed." "I calculated the weather window correctly," she said quietly. "We were never in danger." "That's not the point." His voice rose for the first time. "You directly challenged a superior officer's order to abort. That's not initiative, that's insubordination." Captain Frey studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he sat heavily in his chair. "That's exactly the problem, Hartwell. You're not aggressive enough to engage when it matters, but you're too stubborn to retreat when ordered." The words hung in the air between them. "Combat aviation requires split-second offensive decision-making," he continued, voice lowered. "The willingness to engage, to take the shot, to accept calculated risk for strategic advantage. I understand." "Risk, sir?" "No," he said flatly. "You understand caution, you understand defense. That's not what fighter pilots do." He picked up a folder from his desk. "Your technical scores are exemplary. Your flight control precision is outstanding. But your combat simulation rankings are bottom quartile. You consistently choose defensive postures over offensive engagement." Captain Frey closed the folder. "I can't recommend you for combat aviation certification. It would be easier on your record if you withdrew voluntarily." Elise stood very still, processing everything she'd worked for, culminating in this moment of quiet dismissal. "May I have 24 hours to consider, sir?" Captain Frey nodded once. "Report back tomorrow. Same time. Dismissed." The next day, Elise placed the paperwork before him, signed and dated. "I've chosen withdrawal." Captain Frey looked up sharply. "Not transfer to Transport Division?" "No, sir." "May I ask why?" Elise met his gaze steadily. "Because I don't want to fly cargo, sir. I want to fly fighters. And if I can't do that here, I'll find somewhere else that will let me prove myself." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps or grudging respect, crossed his face. Most cadets would take the safe option. Transfer looks better than withdrawal. "I'm not most cadets, sir." "No," he said slowly. "You're not." 3 hours later, she was gone. Just another washout, just another name crossed off the roster. The say, class moved on. The program continued, and Elise Hartwell became a footnote in Ridgecrest's history, or so they thought. Lanesborough hadn't changed in the month she'd been gone. Same dusty Main Street, same faded awnings over the hardware store, same pickup trucks parked at the diner. Elise's father was waiting on the porch when she pulled up, his face weathered as old leather, eyes squinting in the afternoon sun. He didn't rush to greet her. Didn't need to. Just stood there watching her climb out of the rental car, duffel slung over one shoulder. "Hey, Dad," she said, climbing the steps. "Hey, kiddo." He studied her face. "They make their decision?" "Yeah," she said simply. "They did." He nodded once, held the door open. Coffee's fresh. Inside, the house smelled exactly as it always had. Motor oil, old books, and the cinnamon air freshener her mother had favored before she passed. Elise set her duffel by the stairs and followed her father to the kitchen. "You want to talk about it?" he asked, pouring. Not much to say. She accepted the mug, wrapped her hands around its warmth. "I wasn't what they were looking for." Her father leaned against the sink, arms folded. "What were they looking for? Someone who shoots first and calculates later." He snorted. "That's how pilots end up as statistics." "Maybe." Elise sipped her coffee. "But it's their program, their rules." Her father studied her over the rim of his mug. "The shop's still there, you know. Tools haven't moved an inch. Need a mechanic? Always." He sipped his coffee. "But that's not why you came back." Elise looked out the kitchen window where clouds skimmed across the horizon like lost thoughts. "No," she agreed. "It's not." The days in Lanesborough settled into quiet rhythm. Elise spent most daylight hours in the hangar with her father. She rarely spoke about the academy, not because it hurt too much, but because there didn't seem to be anything left to say. In a town like Lanesborough, stories had long lifespans. Most folks had already heard some version of what happened. A few whispered that she'd washed out, others assumed she'd quit. No one asked directly, and Elise didn't correct them. She spent her days rebuilding what others had given up on. Old Cessnas, weather-worn Piper Cubs, even the occasional crop duster. When the shop was quiet, Elise would climb into the simulator. She and her father had been building since she was 16. It wasn't fancy, just a retired cockpit shell, rigged with salvaged displays and a custom-coded program, but it flew. The screen flashed with open skies, and her hands remembered everything. Then one afternoon, just as Elise was locking up for the day, an old grey truck pulled up beside the hangar. The man who stepped out wore an Air Force windbreaker and sunglasses. "Too dark for the weather." "Elise Hartwell," she nodded, squinting in the sun. "You're Lieutenant Briggs," he smiled. "You remember? You supervised my engine diagnostics exam." "I did." He glanced at the hangar. "The Air Force is retooling its combat aviation program, moving away from pure aggression metrics toward more balanced tactical profiles. They're calling it the Integrated Response Initiative. And," Lieutenant Briggs looked at her directly, "they're looking for pilots who embody this new philosophy. Pilots who think before they strike. Pilots who see the whole chessboard. Not just the next move. Pilots like me," she said, understanding dawning, "exactly like you." After he left, Elise stood in the parking lot for a long time, uncertainty and possibility warring in her mind. That night, she told her father everything. He listened without interruption, then asked simply, "What do you want to do?" "I don't." "No," she admitted. "Going back means facing them again, judgment, scrutiny, being the outsider." "Yes," he agreed, "it does. But staying here means never knowing," he finished for her. "Never finding out if they were wrong about you." Her father reached across, covering her hand with his own, weathered skin over calluses, a mechanic's touch. Your mother used to say something when I'd get stuck on a difficult repair. The only way out is through. Elise smiled faintly. I remember. Well, he said, standing. She was right then, and she'd be right now. They didn't see you for what you are, Elise. That's their mistake, not yours. The Mason airfield, sprawled across 3,000 acres of former farmland. Military and civilian aircraft lined the tarmac in neat rows, from sleek fighter jets to hulking transport planes, all polished to mirror shine for the day's exhibition. Personnel in various uniforms hustled between them, running last-minute checks and security sweeps. Elise arrived an hour before the scheduled start, dressed in simple civilian clothes, khaki pants, white button-down, navy blazer with a small silver pin on the lapel. Her consultant badge hung from a lanyard around her neck, granting access to restricted areas. Lieutenant Briggs found her near Hangar C, where the new XV-22s were being prepared for their demonstration flight. He wore his full-dress uniform now, ribbons and insignia catching the light. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. I came, she agreed, though I'm still not sure why I'm here. Follow me, he replied, already turning toward the hangar's side entrance. There's someone you need to meet. Inside, the space was alive with activity. Ground crew swarming around two gleaming fighters, engineers with tablets checking systems, pilots in flight suits reviewing mission parameters. Lieutenant Briggs led her toward a small group, standing apart from the chaos, 3 senior officers and a civilian in an expensive suit. Brigadier General Harrison, Lieutenant Briggs said, coming to attention. Sir, this is Elise Hartwell, the consultant I mentioned. The general, silver-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in cockpits, extended his hand. Ms. Hartwell, Briggs speaks highly of your technical insight. A commotion erupted across the hangar. Raised voices, hurried. Movement, sir, a technician called, jogging toward them. We've got an issue with Bravo 1, hydraulic regulators showing pressure fluctuations during pre-flight. Can't isolate the cause. The general frowned. Timeline? 20 minutes to scheduled. Takeoff. We're running diagnostics now, but let me see, Elise said, the words out before she could consider their implications. The technician looked to the general, who nodded once. This way, he said, leading them toward the nearest XV-22. The cockpit was open, displays illuminated, systems running through pre-flight checks. A warning light pulsed steadily on the left side panel. Elise climbed the access ladder without hesitation, leaned in to study the readings. Your primary hydraulic loop is showing micro-bubbles, she said, eyes moving rapidly between gauges. The issue isn't in the fluid itself, it's in the feedback sensor. We checked the sensors, the technician protested. They're reading normal. Because the problem's mechanical, not electrical. Elise pointed to a small junction box near the pilot's left knee. This is where your pressure differential is happening. Someone needs to pop that panel and check the actuator pin. Bet you'll find it's got a microfracture. The technician looked skeptical, but followed her instruction. Sure enough, when the panel came off, the actuator pin showed a hairline crack, invisible to casual inspection. Jesus, he muttered. How did you know? I built one in my dad's shop, she said simply. Same design flaw. Easy fix, though. Just needs a shim to redistribute pressure until you can replace the component. Within minutes, the warning light went. Dark. Systems normalized. The technician looked at Elise with newfound respect. General Harrison, who had watched the entire exchange in silence, stepped forward. Impressive, Ms. Hartwell. Just experience, sir. Experience is exactly what we need right now. Before Elise could respond, alarms blared across the hangar. Red emergency lights began flashing. A voice over the intercom called for immediate evacuation. Sir, an officer called, already running toward them. There's a situation. XV-22 Bravo is in flight with mechanical failure. Pilot reporting complete hydraulic loss. How is that possible? We just checked different aircraft, sir. The one already on demonstration circuit. The officer's face was grim. Pilots attempting emergency protocols, but the system's locked. Backup hydraulics non-responsive. Status, currently airborne, but losing altitude and control. Civilian areas in potential crash radius. General Harrison turned to Elise. You just fixed this exact issue. Similar but not identical, she corrected. I'd need to see the actual readings to... No time, he cut in. We need someone in the air. Now. Someone who understands these systems well enough to talk that pilot through emergency procedures. Elise's heart rate accelerated. Sir, I'm not military anymore. I'm not even... I don't care what you are on paper. General Harrison interrupted. I care that you might be the only person on this field who can prevent that jet from hitting a neighborhood. He gestured toward the second 1522. That bird is flight ready. Lieutenant Briggs can fly support. You'll be his co-pilot. Sir, Briggs interjected, with all due respect, reverse that. Elise should be pilot. I'll co-pilot. She needs direct control to assess the hydraulic responses. The general hesitated. Only a fraction of a second. Do it! Everything moved with terrifying speed after that. Flight suits, helmets, rapid pre-flight checks, radio channels established. Emergency clearances granted. Elise found herself in the cockpit of the most advanced fighter jet on the base, hands moving automatically across controls, both familiar and foreign. Lieutenant Briggs settled into the co-pilot seat beside her, already establishing comms with the distressed aircraft. Echo 6, this is Elise Hartwell, she said into the mic, using the call sign she'd been assigned moments earlier. I'm coming up to assist. Tell me what you're seeing on your hydraulic panel. The pilot's voice crackled back, tight with stress. Echo 6, this is Bravo 1. Left side hydraulics completely failed. Right side fluctuating between 20 and 40%. Sticks frozen. Cannot maintain altitude or heading. Copy that, Bravo 1. What was your last stable configuration? Level flight at 12,000, heading 270. Then compression alarm triggered, followed by cascading failures. Elise processed this, mind racing. Sounds like master actuator lockout. Are your bypass valves showing active or dormant? I can't tell. The display is flickering. Check your secondary panel, lower right quadrant. There should be a redundant readout, a pause. Got it. Showing dormant. That's our problem, Elise said, confidence building. Your emergency bypass should have engaged automatically. We need to trigger it manually. As she guided the distressed pilot through complex override procedures, Elise's own aircraft rose, smoothly into the morning sky, her hands steady on the controls, her voice calm in the chaos. The XV-22 responded to her touch like an extension of her body, its systems speaking to her in a language she'd spent a lifetime learning to understand. They spotted Bravo 1 within minutes, a sleek, dark shape against blue sky, visibly struggling. To maintain steady flight, Elise maneuvered carefully into formation, close enough to observe but not so near as to create turbulence. I'm going to talk you through a full hydraulic reset, Elise said, voice steady. It's going to feel wrong. Your instincts will tell you I'm crazy, but I need you to trust me. Copy that, the pilot replied, a slight tremor in his voice. Step by step, Elise guided him through a complex sequence designed to purge the system and force a hard restart. A procedure not in any official manual, but one she'd developed years ago in her father's shop. Now, the critical part, she said, watching the other jet closely. When I give the word, you need to kill power to both engines simultaneously, count to 3, then restart. This will clear the electronic lockout that's preventing your bypass from engaging. Kill power? The pilot's voice rose. At this altitude, with compromised controls. Yes, Elise confirmed. I'll be right beside you. If anything goes wrong, I can assist. Lieutenant Briggs shot her a concerned look. Elise, that's not standard protocol. No, she agreed quietly. but it's the only way to break the feedback loop. Through the canopy, she could see the pilot hesitating. His jet continued to deteriorate, dipping and wobbling as the hydraulics veiled further. "Trust me," Elise said, pouring every ounce of certainty she possessed into those 2 words. "I know these systems. I know what they're telling us." A beat of silence. Then, "Copy that, Echo 6. Ready when you are." Elise positioned her aircraft precisely, matching speed and altitude. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1, now." The other jet's engines went dark. For a heart-stopping moment, it hung suspended in blue sky. A metal bird suddenly stripped of power, subject only to momentum and gravity. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. "Restart now," Elise commanded. The engines flared to life. For a terrible moment, nothing seemed to change. The jet continued its erratic movement. Then, gradually, its flight pattern stabilized. Wings leveled, nose lifted slightly, hydraulic pressure rising, the pilot reported, voice thick with relief. 30%, 40, 50, controls responding. Elise maintained her position alongside, watching carefully for any signs of recurrence. "Take it slow. Full recovery will be gradual. Follow me back to base." Together, the 2 jets banked in a wide arc, heading back toward Mason Airfield, where emergency vehicles already lined the runway, lights flashing against morning sun. When they finally touched down, one after the other, wheels kissing concrete with gentle certainty, a collective exhale seemed to rise from the ground below. Emergency crews swarmed both aircraft as they taxied to a stop. The canopies hissed open, letting in the sound of sirens and shouted orders, and beneath it all, applause rippling from the assembled crowd. Elise sat motionless for a moment, hands still resting on controls that had, for a brief time, felt like home. Then she removed her helmet, unfastened her harness, and climbed down the ladder where General Harrison waited. "That," he said simply, "was not in any emergency manual I've ever read." "No, sir," she agreed. "It was brilliant." He looked past her, to where the other pilot was being helped from his jet, shaken but unharmed. "You just saved a $50 million aircraft. More importantly, you saved that young man's life." Elise followed his gaze. He did the hard part. He had to trust a complete stranger, telling him to do something completely counterintuitive. "Sometimes that's exactly what leadership requires," the general replied, "knowing when to trust expertise that contradicts convention." He turned back to her. "I want you back in the program, Ms. Hartwell. Not as a cadet, as an instructor. The I-22 program needs pilots who understand not just how to fly these birds, but how to listen to them, how to integrate technical knowledge with instinctive control." He smiled slightly. "And how to teach others to do the same." Lieutenant Briggs approached, helmet under one arm. "Told you she was the one, sir." "Yes, you did." General Harrison extended his hand. "What do you say, Ms. Hartwell? Ready to redefine what it means to be a combat pilot?" Elise looked from the general to the jets gleaming in morning light, to the young pilot still trembling with adrenaline and relief, and finally back to her own hands, steady, capable, born for this work. "Yes, sir," she said, taking his hand. "I believe I am." 2 days later, Elise entered the briefing room at Ridgecrest to find Captain Frey already there, standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned when he heard her enter. "Hartwell!" "Captain Frey!" The silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken words. Finally he said, "I saw the footage. I heard it was quite popular. That emergency restart procedure. Where did you learn it?" "I didn't," she replied honestly. "I developed it in my father's shop after a similar failure in a crop duster, scaled it up for the X-22. Captain Frey nodded slowly. "Risky. Sometimes calculation looks like risk from the outside." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Touché." He moved toward her, stopped a respectful distance away. "I was wrong, Hartwell. Not about what I observed. You are cautious, calculated, defensive in your tactical approach, but about what those qualities meant for a combat pilot. The doctrine is changing, she said. Yes, he sighed, and perhaps not a moment too soon. Boots echoed in the corridor outside, cadets arriving for the morning briefing. Captain Frey straightened. They're your students now too, he said, gesturing toward the door. Don't go easy on them just because you remember what it's like on the other side. As the room filled with young faces, Elise took her place at the front. She didn't introduce herself as an instructor, didn't recount her unusual journey, didn't mention the rescue that had brought her full circle to this moment. Instead, she simply said, "Flying isn't about being the fastest or the most aggressive. It's about understanding the conversation between pilot and aircraft. Today, we're going to learn how to listen." And in the back of the room, a young woman with quiet eyes and shoulders that carried an invisible weight looked up from her notes, suddenly alert, as if hearing words she'd been waiting for all her life. Elise saw her, recognized herself in that careful posture, that watchful gaze, and silently promised to see this cadet for what she truly was, not what she appeared to be, because sometimes the simplest-looking women carry the most extraordinary gifts, and sometimes they just need someone to notice. Have you ever been told you weren't right for something, only to prove later that you were exactly what was needed? Or maybe you've been in a situation where your weakness turned out to be your greatest strength. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If Elise's journey resonated with you, hit that like button. It helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these stories. And if you want more videos about extraordinary women who change the world without asking for permission, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes being too cautious or too thoughtful isn't a flaw. It might be exactly the quality the world needs most. Our other stories should be appearing on your screen now. Pick one, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.